boy, could he play guitar and piano, recorder, violin, bass and drums. Gary Kemp explores his passion for Mick Ronson, now on Sky Arts.
DS Automobiles with Sky Arts, shaping new horizons.
I'm Gary Kemp. I'm guitar player and songwriter in Spandau Ballet. In our early years, we were part of the new romantic movement. It was playful, androgynous, and influential on that dawning decade of style, the 1980s. I'm also an actor on stage and screen. But there's something you might not know about me. I have a passion for the musician and man who stood beside David Bowie in the early 70s, Mick Ronson.
I fell in love with Ronno the same night that I fell in love with David Bowie, July the 6th, 1972. I was a wide-eyed boy of 12, and looking out from my TV screen was a space-age messenger giving voice to my burgeoning sexuality. Pointing a painted finger, he spoke to me.
I had to phone someone, so I picked on you.
I'd been chosen. But my real attraction was to his flaxen-haired sidekick, riding shotgun next to him with his golden guitar, Mick Ronson.
There's a starman waiting in the sky.
As the singing starman draped an arm around him, I felt a frisson of desire, and I knew I wanted to go to their planet.
Let the children use it, let all the children boogie. Starman waiting in the sky.
I grew up in an ordinary working-class family. It was the grey, early 70s. Industrial strikes were never out of the news. The pop stars left over from the 60s had now mostly grown beards and got an Eastern religion. There wasn't much for a young boy from North London to relate to.
You just scream with boredom.
It was in these confines that David's songs touched me. With mixed playing and musical settings, they transformed me. Mick Ronson Gibson Les pulverized me and countless other kids into ecstasy. He's the reason I picked up the guitar. David had all the cocksure swagger, but Mick had the emotion. It was full of yearning and passion and frustration, triumph even. It was the sound of my adolescent heart, captured on vinyl. It inspired me to play guitar. So I've come to Hull because I want to know who inspired Mick and why did he want to become a rock star. Mick grew up around here on the Greatfield estate in the east of Hull. It was all newly built just after the Second World War. His mother saw a kernel of passion in Mick for music and indulged him in piano lessons. A fairly unusual thing for any working-class boy at that time. Then, in the 1960s, just before he became a teenager, he heard Duane Eddy and Hank Marvin, and Mick fell in love with the sound of the guitar. The electric guitar, possibly the greatest weapon ever given to the working classes. And the most iconic of all of those electric guitars was the Gibson Les Paul. It was designed in the early 50s by Les Paul himself. a guitar for posher occasions that looked like a bow tie. In the early 60s, they discontinued it, but it became one of the guitars of choice of the rock and roll fraternity. And in '68, they reissued one. And this is exactly the guitar Mick would have bought. This is a 1968 Gibson custom Les Paul reissue, and it's mine. What Mick did was he changed the frets because it's very flat. He wanted them a bit higher so he could bend the notes a bit easier. But the thing he did to make it his own was he stripped all this paint off and he took it back to the maple cap underneath. So it was never a golden guitar. It was a stripped wood guitar, which actually, if you think about it, is a very early 70s thing to do.
Before Mick was the leader of Bowie's Spiders from Mars, he was one of the Rats from Hull, local heroes in the late 60s. Though Mick's Gibson Les Paul would change our lives, it first changed his.
When I was young, I was really quite shy, you know, and a very nervous sort of kid. But when you get a guitar in your hand or you're playing, somehow you're this other person. All that seems to leave you somehow. I think I used to get rid of a lot of anger and frustration by playing loud and heavy, you know.
Back then, Mick didn't know he was soon to meet the man who would become one of the greatest pop stars of all time.
This is ground control to Major Tom.
David Bowie, even in his early career, was constantly morphing his identity.
Want to know whose shirts you wear.
And in the first month of the 1970s, he decided he wanted to make his music heavy and loud. Rat's drummer, John Cambridge, had left the band and was working with David in London.
I'm sort of saying to David, well, I know a good guitarist in Hull, Mick Ronson, and they were sort of shugging me off, saying, yeah, OK, John, you know. I said, look, I'm going back to Hull. Do you want me to bring this guy out with us? You've nothing to lose, just try him. Yeah, OK, John, bring him.
John took me to the spot where he tried to persuade Mick to audition for David.
So I came back, and then I had to get in touch with Mick. He was working for the council. He used to be a gardener, Mick. And so I went to this hut and I said, where's Mick? And they said, oh, he's working on so-and-so, so-and-so. Right, so I got him a car. And it was like this, completely empty. And Mick was just in the sort of like distance, and I'm shouting out, Mick! Mick! And he stops and he's creosoting the field. And so I'm walking along with him, you know, as I was walking along, you know. Do you want us to walk along?
Yeah.
So he's walking along, and I'm like where you are, and I'm saying, Mick, there's this guy in London, David Bowie, he needs a guitarist. He didn't stop, and anybody else, if you was a joiner with a piece of wood, you'd stop, but Mick was just carried on walking. I said, he wants a guitarist. And, oh, no, I'm not doing that. Oh, Mick, you've got to come down. You've got to get... No. So I'm pestering. We nearly did all the pitch, nearly matched all the pitch until he finally said, OK. And I said, I'm going back to London, you know, so-and-so. So Mick came with me, got his guitar and went in me Hillman Minx at the time, and away we went.
I find it incredible because if you hadn't have found where he was that day and gone back, maybe I wouldn't have taken up guitar. Maybe hundreds of guitar players wouldn't have taken up guitar. It was on Tuesday, the 31st of January, 1970, that John Cambridge persuaded Mick to quit his job and come back down with him to London. 3 days later, on the Friday, John brought Mick here to where the legendary Marquee Club once stood in Soho to watch David and his band do a gig. Later on, when the gig was over and the club was empty, Mick auditioned for David. The pressure was on Mick to deliver.
And deliver he did. And soon they were making their first album together, The Man Who Sold the World.
So Mick's the first thing you hear on the first album that he made with David. Sort of feedback. I mean, the Beatles were dead, Zeppelin was happening, prog rock was about to start. So I think David was having a go at that. And of course, Mick was the ideal person. Mick had begun to be taken into Bowie's musical world, but now this quiet, honest and somewhat ordinary lad from Hull was about to be drawn into Bowie's more risque, bohemian lifestyle.
Everything you've ever wanted.
I've driven down to Beckenham in South London to find the ghost of an old house, Haddon Hall. In 1970, it was Bowie's HQ, his court, his Graceland. And it's here that he brought Mick, introduced him to his creative coterie. It's not really the sort of place you'd imagine the decadence of glam rock to be invented in. It's very leafy lanes, suburbia. In fact, Enid Blyton lived just down the road.
Well, there's no blue plaque, no guided tour. In fact, there's no Haddon Hall anymore. But this is where it would have stood. This big Victorian imposing building that by the time David had arrived there was decaying decadence, a crumbling, rambling manor. But it was a hive of activity.
There was this big hall, which could have been a banqueting hall with a minstrel's gallery around the top. David had and Angie had the small room off the side, and the boys, the band, had to sleep on mattresses, basically, on the minstrel's gallery, and there they would rehearse.
One of David's girlfriends, singer and actress Dana Gillespie, was a frequent visitor. I'm fascinated by Haddon Hall. It's taken on this kind of mythology now. You know, was it fair to say that it was a sort of hippie commune, or was this a great place of work?
It was all productive in a weird way. I mean, if you sat in where David and Angie slept, he would always be surrounded on the big bed with bits of paper and strumming his guitar, writing down ideas.
I was still very much trying to find who I was, and electric music was appealing to me more and more, especially the heavier kind of guitar-oriented things. Mick came from Hull, you know, and was very down to earth. But when I first heard him play, I thought, oh, he is fantastic, this kid is great. And so I sort of hoodwinked him into working with him.
The first impressions of David was like, he was, quite a giving sort of person, a kind person. And also you knew he was going to be, you weren't here messing about, he was going to be somebody,
I was always closest of all with Ronno. He was a quiet man, very good-looking man, very strong Hull accent, which I can't do. He had the longest eyelashes that should be illegal on a man and given to a woman.
Your face to face with the man who sold the world.
Someone else who came to know Mick and David well when she recorded their song, The Man Who Sold the World, was Lulu.
I stood in the studio, they played live, and there was a lot of collaboration between Mick and David. For me, Mick was quiet. Stood at the back and supported David. Mick was a great rock and roll guitarist. And that really gave a lot of weight to David's music. Like a diamond, when it's beautiful on its own, but when it has a beautiful setting, the right setting, it really is on fire.
Your face to face with the man who sold the world.
But Mick and David's own LP, The Man Who Sold the World, didn't sell many copies, and in 1971, Mick, disheartened, returned to Hull. Back home, Mick formed the eponymously named band Ronno. Dominated by his Gibson Les Paul, Mick took the sound of the Bowie album further into pure heavy metal. A sound born of the industrial north, places like Hull. It's pretty full on, if you like that sort of thing.
And then David called. He told Mick he'd written a new bunch of songs, this time piano-led, a little bit more plaintive. And would he and the boys like to come down and help him record the album? The boys from Hull were about to become the Spiders from Mars.
Wow. Hunky Dory, that album, I just was blown away.
Oh, you pretty things. Don't you know you're driving your mom and Papa's insane?
David and Mick had a magic for that time it's indefinable, really. That band was hot, and Mick was integral.
Let me say it again. You gotta make way for the homo superior.
David began delegating multiple roles to his musical companion. Mick was now not just guitarist, but pianist, arranger, orchestrator, almost becoming an artist in his own right.
I mean, the thing about Mick is that he was much more than just a rock guitarist. I think David found someone that was really a gift to him.
It's a god-awful small affair to the girl with the mousy hair.
Mick wrote the orchestral parts for one of the most famous songs of all time, Life on Mars.
But this was one of the first things he ever orchestrated, Mick. There are differing stories that he was writing it in the middle of the night in Haddon Hall. There's another story that says he wrote the string parts in the toilet at Trident Studios, which I find hard to believe, really. But it's an amazing first track.
She could spit in the eyes of fools as they ask her to focus on
But what would someone from the classical world think of Mick's orchestrations? I asked renowned conductor Charles Hazelwood, who brought a string section along with him.
It's incredibly accomplished.
That's what I'm wondering.
Did he have any training?
Piano and a bit of violin, and he did, but he was a working-class guy from Hull. And that's why I'm so impressed by what he achieves here, aren't you? I mean,
yeah.
It's his ear, isn't it? Naturally.
Totally, it's his ear, but also an innate sense of taste. Never too much, never too little, just enough, the right amount.
And that's his guitar playing. That's extraordinary. The cello stuff as well, that to me sounds like the kind of guitar parts he plays on songs that don't have strings on.
You are so right. Let's pick up letter A, because this is a classic example of what you're talking about. This ought to be one of Mick Ronson's kind of, trademark guitar lines, but instead it's in the lower strings. Ah. It's great, isn't it? Snaking its way up. And then here come these two. Good, yeah, great. And what's really great also, the choice he makes to go from da, da, so it's in and it's out, and then suddenly it becomes much more sustained, like endless runs in music by great composers like Vivaldi or Corelli, which this track is full of.
I think what Mick does is he services the song. He's not trying to overtake the song.
I agree, even though a lot of what the strings are doing is like, look at me, but it's still not detracting from the track, it's only ever adding to the track. I agree with you, that's what makes him a great artist. And 3, 4.
What I find beautiful and moving is that Mick is no longer with us, and yet he is, and that's the great thing about any artist, that their work lives on.
But Life on Mars and the Hunky Dory LP wouldn't yet be the classics that are celebrated today. David was changing, and Mick, and later I, were about to be utterly transformed by the latest character in Bowie's fabulous Identity Parade.
I'm at Soho's Trident Studios, where in 1980 I recorded my first single, to cut a long story short, with Spandau Ballet. But that might never have happened if it hadn't have been for the fact that almost a decade before then, David, Mick and the band came in here to record a new bunch of songs. A bunch of songs that were rockier, more New York influenced. Songs that told a story. It would be an album that would change Mick and David's lives forever, and mine as well.
Embodying the story of an alien rock star, the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, with Mick's playing and musical arranging to the fore, became a sensation.
This was the photo session from Hedden Street, just above where this photo was taken. Which, of course, doesn't quite look like this now. I'm going to take you to Hedden Street. This is where, in early 1972, Ziggy Stardust first landed. In those days, I would have probably been chased away for scrawling "Ziggy was here" with a felt-tip marker on the wall. But now, there's a plaque in his honor. Ziggy was the ultimate messianic rock star. And with him, Bowie didn't just blur the lines between boys and girls, but between himself and his creation. Bowie was Ziggy come to save us, and I bought him hook, eyeliner, and haircut.
You know, all that dressing up and makeup and everything, kind of what was needed, you know, at the time. I mean, kind of freed a lot of people up, I think, and it made people express themselves a little more, you know. David would be delicate, a little more woman-like or something. And I was kind of like stomping along on the side there, a bit more like a, I can't really say bricklayer, but that's kind of what I mean, you know.
I think Mick touchingly downplays his role in this transformative journey Bowie was taking us all on. I wanted to explore this some more. Dylan Jones, editor of GQ magazine, has written about Ziggy and the Spiders' wider cultural impact.
It was as much about the way they looked as the music they made. Of course it is.
Yeah, and because it gave you something to another world for you to aim for, you know, different from this drab world I was living, and I wanted a bit of that. And in a way, when it became our turn to set the tone, as it were, and to create the music, this was our benchmark. That's what we grew up on, and why we were so visually obsessed in the 80s. I mean, this is on stage. He's got his hand draped around him. I kind of didn't know who I was sexually, I suppose, at 13. I remember, you know, suddenly I was rushing out after seeing this and buying stuff that was, you know, quite feminine. You know, bangles around my arms and scoop neck T-shirts, loom-type trousers, anything that I could get my hands on that sort of somehow was a little bit outrageous.
It was outrageous, but it made it acceptable. There's a guy just putting his arm around his best mate at the end of the night. You drunk a bit too much, I love you. Because think back to secondary modern school, 1972, tough playground. And it's like, I saw David Bowie on television last night and I thought he was great. That's a kind of bold thing to say, right? Because it only takes somebody to go, and then it's a bundle and it's this and it's that. So this diffused it for lots of people and made it, yeah, I saw him, that was, yeah. Mick Ronson is the Trojan horse of Ziggy Stardust.
There you are.
To explore how Mick created his sound, I've come to visit guitarist and producer Bernard Butler, whose early band Suede with singer Brett Anderson seemed to have something of the Mick and David dynamic about them.
I mean, that sounds like Ronson, doesn't it? You know, it's that kind of throaty, growling sound, but it's that throaty sound that we all fell in love with as well, I fell in love with as a kid.
It's big and bold, and it's quite dangerous. Basically, all I'm playing is... I don't know if you can hear that. And it could be anything, any 60s band, could be the Hollies or something, you know, or very simple kind of stuff. And then, crucially, then you add the wah-wah, which sort of messes up all the harmonics, so all the little tones clash. But then, most importantly, I'm just playing right at the bottom, so I'm going...
Bowie had this lovely, high, thin voice, which he used, especially on Ziggy.
Yeah.
And Mick's guitar doesn't touch those tones at all. It sits right underneath, doesn't it?
Yeah. The way he fitted around between the high and the low, just the way he'd go from... You know, you might hear the low notes.
That's right.
Played guitar, jamming good with Weird and Gilly and the Spiders from Mars. He played it left,
all these harmonics up here.
played it too far. Became the special man. Then we were Ziggy's band.
The sound is very emotional, very dramatic, very sentimental. I think to start doing all of that as a guitar player, you have to be a little bit brave, or just really emotional, really sensitive soul.
While touring the Ziggy album in the US, the band began to record the follow-up, Aladdin Sane.
It's a great image. This cover was shot by Duffy. Duffy went on and directed the Gold video for us.
For Aladdin Sane, Mick stepped up to direct everything in the studio, fulfilling even more of David's wild visions. The quiet boy from Hull was now playing to a world stage.
Time.
Transfixed by the album's androgynous cover as a kid, I always loved this song's interplay between Mick and pianist Mike Garson. And I'm about to speak with Mike right now.
Mike, it's such a pleasure to talk to you.
I'm enjoying this very much already.
Tell me about Mick.
I've played with thousands of guitar players, both in jazz and rock, and he reached me the most. So I knew that I liked this guy.
Yeah.
Mick and I became very close. We had so many areas where there was a commonality and mutual respect. And then we recorded the Aladdin Sane album.
So how did that work? I mean, I remember getting it as a kid and putting that on, and your piano is so distinctive.
And yet the very keen
shapes of the melody that Mick played, and the two seemed to really interact well together. Were you feeling that in the studio?
Absolutely. Mick was the unsung hero. I mean, the way he arranged these tunes, and David knew just to lay back and let Mick do his thing.
I think a good example of you two working together is maybe at the end of Time, his lead guitar.
Over the top of what David and you are doing.
I particularly love that moment. Time. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
You may have seen me, Mike, because I was out in the audience at that Hammersmith show.
I was looking out there, so I probably saw you. I don't know that either of us looked the same then.
Hammersmith Odeon, July the 3rd, 1973. My first date with David and Mick. This final night of the tour was filmed. frozen in time, if you like.
I think I was sitting up there. That's my memory of this madness that was going on in here. This is the place where it began for me, because it changed my life. I felt forever changed after this. And of course, Ziggy was all about, you know, the Messiah coming to Earth to teach us something. And we were all willing to be pupils. It was almost religious, really. It was a sense of being at a life-changing event, you know. How could I ever go back to my mum and dad's house after this? This was an incredible show. I mean, there was a guy here with great charisma who was stalking the stage, but every time he left, you know, Mick would take over. He was equal to David on stage. His golden hair matched with his golden guitar. It was so sexual, and legs sprayed apart, guitar being held phallically, but no one had looked this outrageous. And that sound somehow felt like the scream from inside us. All of that pent-up emotion that we had as young people, you know, just reaching 13, all that pent-up sexuality, not knowing who we were. Somehow Mick's guitar was that noise. And he was channeling us.
But at the end of this tumultuous concert, Bowie bizarrely split the Spiders from Mars, effectively ending his partnership with Mick.
Not only is it the last show of the tour, but it's the last show that we'll ever do. Thank you. Bye-bye, we love you.
David Bowie had just announced he was killing Ziggy Stardust and splitting from my hero and his guitar man, Mick Ronson. It ended a 3-year run of albums and images that remain touchstones today. David had told Mick just a few weeks before about his desire to split the band, but the reality must have hit Mick pretty hard.
We did a whole tour of England before we did this concert. Places were mobbed, screaming fans. I mean, it was great. I mean, it was a great tour. This last night, it was a great last night too. I mean, there's a lot of energy there. It was kind of pretty sad in some ways too, you know, because it was kind of the end of that period, you know.
Of all of the people, I felt most sorry for Ronno. It was painful. It was a bit like an amputation, in a way. You know, it's awful when suddenly somebody doesn't want you anymore.
One of the things Bowie's done periodically is, you know, clean house. And, you know, we get a totally different set of musicians in. David felt that he had become too dependent on Mick. David could be quite ruthless, and Mick's style and approach would, I think, have tied it too much to the records that had gone before.
And this is Mick's first solo album. What a beautiful cover. Something from a movie. It has all those wonderful elements of what glam was, you know, the theatricality and the word slaughter. That sounds very glam, doesn't it?
Bowie's manager thrust Mick up front to be a new solo star. This was Mick's big chance.
This is Ronson on tour. This was a giveaway when he played at the Rainbow. There you are. I'd actually have that on my wall, but my wife would complain.
Judging by this gorgeous poster, Ronno was now every inch the star. I've come to see a couple of fellow Ronson fans who stuck with him in his solo career. Oh, hang on, there's loads of girls outside the studio.
Can I sign the autograph afterwards?
Can I get a photo?
All right, thanks.
Cheers, Gary.
Duran Duran broke through in the same new romantic era as Spandau Ballet. And, no surprise, John Taylor and Nick Rhodes have been young Ronson fans too.
We really bonded over Ronno. I mean, strangely enough, it was, I think, because David was so mainstream, everybody liked David. So, like, us being, like, elitist, it's like when everybody was a Bowie fan, you say, well, yeah, but we're Mick Ronson fans.
Yeah.
And actually, I think the first time we met, we were introduced by a mutual friend, and Ronson was, like, our first shared enthusiasm. So for Mick to then go solo and have this kind of this solo career, it was kind of interesting, wasn't it?
It was sort of forced upon him somewhat.
Yeah. Yeah. It was the first gig we went to see his tour. It was my first live gig.
Expensive.
Yeah.
Expensive tickets, £1.25, front row.
I was excited about Mick's solo career, and expectations for his success were high.
It was almost as if it were a foregone conclusion that he was going to equal what David had done and that he was as big a part of the whole thing and he was going to be a massive star.
It was almost like a curse in a way. People kept saying, can you give me something that sounds like the old Ziggy stuff, like the David Bowie? But he was not David Bowie.
Mick had absolutely everything a great star requires, except one thing. I mean, he had the voice, he had the looks, he had the charisma, he had the musical imagination, he could sing, but the one thing he lacked was the ego. He didn't have the drive to dominate. To say he was one of rock's greatest second bananas is not to do him a disservice. It means he was one of the best guys at riding shotgun for other people.
With his solo career not really working out, Mick next rode shotgun with frontman Ian Hunter, a pairing that lasted for the rest of Mick's life. Even though it didn't really push musical boundaries, it was great fun. And this is where I left, into the excitement of punk, and soon to pursue my own dream with Spandau Ballet, first fired by the spark of my starmen, Mick and David, 6 years before.
So this is where, in 1978, on a cold Tuesday night, I queued as a teenager and gave £3 to a young Welsh boy called Steve Strange. It was called a Bowie night. And downstairs was where the baton got passed to the new generation. It was where those teeny bopper kids who fell in love with Bowie and Mick on Starman decided to devise the next decade. Down here, the 80s started.
We children of Ziggy and glam rock were about to take on youth culture in the only way we knew, with mascara, extravagant costumes and androgyny. Mick had got married to Susie Fusi, who had been one of Bowie's Ziggy-era dressers. And by now he was working as producer for younger artists like the Rich Kids and Morrissey. But in 1992, aged 46, Mick was diagnosed with liver cancer. His wife, daughter, and musical friends rallied round. But Mick didn't stop working.
He very kindly agreed to come along and play with us for the Freddie tribute show.
The concert honouring Queen's Freddie Mercury featured not just Mick, but David Bowie. Together for one last time.
I'd like to introduce you to the guitar player from the Spiders and Mars, Mick Ronson.
It was very touching for fans, I think, because, you know, after Mick left David, he was always looking for other guitar sidekicks, but for me, none ever really replaced Mick. It was...
I would agree with that, yeah. I mean, there were some great people, but there was never a duality, a pairing again.
Ian Hunter.
The song was a classic that Bowie had written for Ian Hunter's band, Mott the Hoople. But it was Mick that owned the stage.
You can recognize Mick's playing immediately. His guitar playing is unique to him. He's the real deal.
God knows when it was, when he had to drag out of himself to get up there and do that thing at Wembley, because he couldn't have been feeling very well. We did know that he was ill, but, you know, you never expect somebody to just not be there suddenly.
But in this last performance, Mick's not playing his iconic Gibson Les Paul. What had happened to that guitar? No one knows quite why, but it seems Mick simply gave it to the Hard Rock Cafe in Sydney, Australia. And I found out that Mick's guitar went on to change hands between collectors, commanding quite a price.
I'm in the south of France, and I'm on my way to Monaco, because Mick's golden Les Paul guitar now resides here. It feels a long way, both geographically and spiritually, from Hull. I feel quite nervous about seeing it. It's something from my childhood. In fact, the last time I saw it, I was 14 years old.
Gary.
Simon.
Lovely to meet you.
Collector Simon Dolan is now the proud owner of Mick Ronson's famous Gibson Les Paul.
So here she is.
Wow. Can I? Oh, wow. It's connected to Mick, isn't it? This was so much his beast, his guitar that made him. But for me, it's what's so important is what's come out of here. The guitar solos on Time, the Ziggy Stardust riff, you know, all of those albums, the sound was played on this thing. I'd love a go on it, actually, but I feel...
Do you know what? I'm going to leave you to it alone.
OK. All right. I can only apologise to Mick for doing that, but... Wow, you know, what a joy to do it, you know. Mick may not have been overly expressive as a man, but his emotion, his melody, and his power came from a place that no one could ever meet and could only ever hear or see when he played guitar. Not long after Mick's death, Hull City Council decided to erect this Mick Ronson Memorial Stage in his honour. It's modest and unassuming, not unlike the man himself. It's strange to think that if Mick hadn't have taken that call from Bowie and left Hull and gone back to London to stand by Ziggy's side, I and millions of others may never have heard or been inspired by Mick Ronson. In fact, the world may never have heard of David Bowie.
We lost Mick Ronson back in '93, and last year his former bandmate Bowie followed, along with some other music greats. Remember them next on Sky Arts. Then, straight after at 11:30, another chance to remind ourselves why there will only ever be one David Bowie.
My heart's in the basement, my weekends at an all-time low.